Right, thanks and welcome to Reason Coffee Shop and Bookstore. There's some new faces here, so that's really nice. Thank you very much for coming. Tonight's debate is an atheist, Christians, and it does God exist? And this debate came about because actually Mike gave a presentation on the historicity of Jesus that was very well attended, and these two, Josh and John, came to that and asked lots of questions, and it was quite a nice evening and quite a respectful evening, so therefore we invited them in to give their talk from the Christian side, and again it went very well. So Mark came up with the idea of let's see if people are willing to do a debate, and we're very grateful that John, Josh and Mike have agreed to do this debate for us, so thank you very much. Yes indeed. It will be a traditional debate format, so there will be 15 minutes each side. I won't go over the points, you can tell the points yourself, but it'll be 15 minutes each side. Then there will be a reply to the opening arguments, 5 minutes for Mike, 5 minutes for Josh and John, and then there'll be an answer and 20 questions, which will be about 20 minutes. So during their actual presentation, please no questions, save them to the end. Is that okay? We are filming tonight, but the cameras are pointing this way, so no one's got to worry. They won't be caught on camera. I guess all it says is Mike is going first, I believe. Are you?
I believe, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay with it?
Yeah.
Okay, Mike.
Okay. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming. I'm going to cover 3 areas in 15 minutes, so 5 minutes on each. One is the cosmological fine-tuning of the universe. The second is the psyche of the idea of God, and the third is morality. Where does morality come from if God does not exist? So, 15 minutes on the world according to Mike. It is argued that the apparent fine-tuning of the many elements in physical cosmology such that life is able to exist are due to either necessity, chance or design. Both theologians and non-theologians dismiss the necessity option, since there are so many possible variations for the settings that necessity itself would be impossible. The theological standpoint is that fine-tuning being due to chance is not logical, because the probability of all of the constants being set such that life can exist, stars, planets and life could form, are so great that it would be outrageously remarkable for humankind to have been so lucky. Now, there is a colossal unfounded assumption here, and that assumption is that we, humans, are the sole reason for the existence of the entire universe in the first instance. That there was a pre-existent thought process in the ether, pre-universe, that humans should be created. And the only way to achieve the goal of the existence of humans was for a universe to be created for them to exist in, structured in such a precise manner that the elements required to create a home for them would eventually, over billions of years, create that home. Now, that is very presumptuous of us, so let's look at this from a wider rather than a narrow point of view. If we are not the reason for the universe, and there is no good basis to assume that we are, if we are just simply one of many millions of random outcomes of the universe rather than a calculated intended outcome, the cosmological settings and the resulting mathematical values become irrelevant. If any given variation of settings for the cosmological values would create a mixture of resulting outcomes ranging from either nothing at all to any one of many different instances of something, variations of something we could not possibly conceive of because we do not exist in such a universe, then this universe just happens to be set such that it does result in a variation of something. Moreover, the many differing arrangements of atoms inside this particular universe are concepts that we can perceive of purely because we are one of those arrangements of atoms. We are simply part of the multitude of items that have formed or evolved as a mere consequence of the values in existence in this universe. And in this scenario, our existence is not remarkable at all. We just exist because we can exist. If we could not exist, we would not be here and we would not be having this conversation. We only perceive our existence to be remarkable because we have the ability to conduct abstract thought. And that ability to conduct abstract thought comes with a pitfall. And the pitfall is, it has somehow led us to believe that we are the sole intended outcome for everything that has happened, for everything that is, and for everything that will happen in the future. And we are not. As for fine-tuning, it was long thought by physicists that the expansion of the universe was slowing down, and that eventually gravity would the force of gravity would stop the expansion. But from a 1998 discovery, it is now known that the universe is actually expanding at an accelerating rate. It's speeding up, which apparently means the cosmological constant is actually slightly bigger than zero. It has a positive value. Physicists believe this means our universe is most likely doomed to expand forever and ultimately die in a big freeze. So it turns out then, a better value in terms of intelligent design for the cosmological value would be slightly negative in order to arrest this accelerating expansion. So we have to question the intelligent design theory on this argument alone. It seems any would-be intelligent designer picked the wrong value for the cosmological constant, and as a result, our continued existence cannot happen. We are doomed to cease to be in the future. So, not so fine-tuned after all. Moreover, our universe is almost 14 billion years old, but our Earth is only 4.5 million years old, and human existence on Earth barely 200,000 years old. And due to the lack of diversity in the human gene pool, we know that at some stage in our very short 200,000 year history we almost died out. Recent genetic studies suggest that around 70,000 years ago the worldwide population of humans was reduced to about 2,000 individuals in a small localized area. We nearly went extinct. None of these facts point to an omnipotent God designing a home specifically for humans. And if, hypothetically, the apparent cosmological fine-tuning did mean an all-powerful God existed, then which God would it be? Yahweh? Odin? Kronos? Zeus? Mithras? Osiris? Why could this God not clear up such confusion with a simple, non-cryptic, plain vanilla communication to all members of its creation, rather than cryptic, conflicting messages to a special selected chosen few in different localized areas? To me, this would seem an easy and simple thing to do, and a desirable thing to do for an omnipotent created being that required worship from humans. The reason that humans worldwide do not recognize a universal homogeneous concrete God, but rather many different abstract gods, is because God comes from in here, not up there. So, how did the abstract of God arrive inside the human psyche? The idea of God is a man-made meme, and a very successful meme at that, arguably human history's most successful meme. But a meme does not have to have any subject or be factually correct to be successfully transmitted. It needs only one of two things to become popular or generally accepted, and that is that it is either desirable, regardless of its factual or non-factual nature, desirable falsehoods being more palatable than uncomfortable truths, or that it is brutally enforced by despotic leaders, or even a mixture of the two. So let's now consider the birth of such God memes. Their start point was in astronomy, observing the appearance and the movement of the stars. This then morphs into astrology, giving man-made, incorrect interpretations of the stars and their reasons for their existence and their movement. This happened in at least four main historic cultures, being the Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek and Chinese cultures. It seems humankind was inevitably drawn to doing this. These cultures each grouped the stars into imagined shapes and then gave characters and personalities to the shapes along with stories. And these were the first gods. Some were humanoid, some were mystical animals, and some were a mixture of the two. For the Egyptians, and there is good reason to follow the Egyptian path here, the star group we know as Orion was their main god, Osiris. The brightest star in the sky by the sun, Sirius, was Isis, his wife. and their son, begot without sexual intercourse, I might add, an immaculate conception, was Horus. This trinity of gods resided in paradise, just beyond the Great Hall of Judgment, in an area of the night sky known to the Egyptians as the Duat, a place where pharaohs and their families could go after death if they passed the required tests. To successfully pass the test, the deceased would need to take with them into the afterlife a personalised Book of the Dead. This book contained the required incantations that would ensure passage to heaven, and there was only one place to obtain a personalised Book of the Dead, and that was from the priests of Amun, the wily old priests. So the astute priests suggest that wealthy gentry could also surpass death and join the pharaohs with Osiris in the afterlife, a new idea in ancient Egypt, and so initiating a lucrative scam, selling many personalised books of the dead and creating a desirable meme, the abstract thought of the immortality of the soul. Now, this is just one example from one culture. The same concept was played out many times in many different forms in many cultures. So can we find a quick parallel for tonight's debate? Yes. The Catholic Church of the Middle Ages sold certificates of indulgence to the population, telling them that possession of such a certificate from the church would ensure they, or their loved ones, whosever's name was at the top of the certificate, would escape purgatory and pass directly into heaven upon their death, regardless of any sins committed here on earth. So that is how we received the abstract thought of the immortality of a soul and a place called heaven for it to go to. It was a religious scam and a desirable falsehood. So how do we arrive at the idea of a single God? Well, actually we don't, do we? It's purely a matter of where and when you live and the chance outcome of past battles in that area as to whether you worship one God, many gods, and in many instances which version of a particular God. This is not due to any substance in the story or the meme of the God you worship, but purely down to the brutal enforcement of belief in that God upon the ancestors of that area. Some examples. In 700 Common Era, most of northwest Germany, Saxony, was pagan. This land was conquered by Charlemagne. In all the land he conquered, the locals were given two choices: either accept my God and baptism now, or go and meet your God now. And so all of Charlemagne's Europe became Catholic Christians or perished by decapitation. Around 620 Common Era, the same thing happened in the Middle East with the Islamic religion and the onslaught of the Muslim armies, and so the Middle East beg your pardon, became Muslim. It was not by desire, the people had no choice. If we look at the areas in the world where the Muslims and the Christians did not invade, we find in general, not in total, but in general, other religions, and to no great surprise. So the idea of a God that requires worship is not an idea that has any substance at all. It is a man-made meme that was forced onto our ancestors upon pain of torture and death, and it was seen by the enforcers as a very useful and profitable control tool. Okay, so if God does not exist, where does human morality come from, if not from God and his scriptures? Well, good morality for me, and this is a personal viewpoint, so probably not correct, is feeling good inside when your actions have helped someone in some way, feeling bad and uncomfortable inside when your actions have inadvertently upset or harmed someone in some way. And we all have this moral compass, but it seems to be set differently for each person. There are those in society who care nothing at all if their actions have harmed or hurt somebody. So long as they have enjoyed themselves as a result of their actions or benefited in some way, they have a total lack of empathy for others. And to me, this is bad morals. But the barometer for the distinction between what is considered good and what is considered bad most resolutely does not come from religious scripts or religious observance. In fact, quite the reverse. Doing good in exchange for a divine reward or to escape some form of divine punishment is not an example of good morals. It's an example of being blackmailed. And moreover, vicarious redemption is an appalling idea. as is not being responsible for your own actions, because a higher power will forgive you your bad actions in return for worshipping that higher power. The religious texts themselves are full of examples of very bad morals and teachings, particularly against females, and all three Abrahamic religious texts openly accept and support slavery. To sum up morality, we seem to have lost sight of the fact that we are actually one of the animals on this planet. We have perceived a thought that we are a special, unique entity, separate and different from the animals. And this is wrong. Our natural state and our natural instincts are identical to the mammalian animal kingdom because we are mammals. But our ability to conduct cumulative communication over millennia has led us to realise that mutual help benefits everyone, although we do struggle with the full application of this concept worldwide. However, today we have adopted this situation to such an extent that we do live in more harmony today than we have ever achieved throughout history. Not perfect harmony worldwide by any means. There's still a long way to go before we reach that goal. This realisation of the benefit of mutual group help, the you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours concept, is where our morals and our empathy is derived from, and from where it grows and evolves. It has nothing to do with religion or religious scripture. The truth of the matter is, organised religion simply appointed itself as the bastions of good morals, and nobody asked them to do it. It hijacked the concept and claimed that it had been placed in charge of deciding on what is good moral behaviour and what is bad moral behaviour, and had been given a divine instruction to dispense that knowledge to humankind. Good moral values and empathy to others can be nurtured in every single human being as a child without the need to reference fictitious gods, or religious scripture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, for your opening argument. And who's going to take it? Josh. So Josh is going to do the
evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Neil, for hosting us. John and I are very happy to be here with you all. And while John and I are very local, and Mike is actually from the other side of the county, and so we appreciate that still this is a away game for us and a home game for Mike. So thank you very much for inviting us back, for hosting and sharing time with you. So we are theists, we are believers, we're Christians, more specifically we are Christadelphians. John is good at sports and spreadsheets, and I play a bit of guitar and think about poetry sometimes, that kind of stuff. And we wish for a world that is unlike the one that we have now. We think that this world can be better. And we want to engage positively with our communities in which we live. We want to live alongside others in peace. And we think that the question tonight is a great one, and one that we should approach, without with an open mind, from a mildly intellectual position, if you like, and recognise the fact that there are questions to ask and questions to be answered. And so we're going to present three arguments for you here. Firstly, for morality, secondly, the cosmological fine-tuning, and then thirdly, the resurrection of Jesus. And the three arguments are affirming that there is a God, and in each we're going to consider the evidence, we're going to draw a conclusion from that evidence, and then we're going to ask a question for Mike and for you all to think about and consider. So to begin then, the argument of morality. To think about this is to think about the themes good and evil. How can these be known? Where can we draw the lines between right and wrong, and how can we do so with confidence? We, as believers, we question the adequacy of a naturalistic explanation of morality. If we believe that there is a God, and we think God wants humans to know about him and how to relate to him, we would expect a God of some kind to make this reality known to humans in fairly obvious ways. And the moral argument pertains to the source of objective moral values and duties, a moral ontology, if you like. It's not how we know these things, what is moral or what is immoral, and it's not about what we mean by good or bad specifically, the sort of semantics of what is and isn't moral. We just see that moral values are grounded in the character and nature of God. That's where we get them from. That's the bit that we're focusing on. We're not suggesting that God actively dictates moral precepts into the consciences of people faced with 50-50 decisions or anything like that, but that human beings' ideas of the content of morality depend, of course, to a large extent on education, on environment, on backgrounds like that, and we must use reason in assessing the validity of actual moral ideas and choices in the societies in which we live. But the possibility of criticising an accepted moral order or code presupposes the idea that there is an objective standard, that there is an ideal moral order which imposes itself in the thoughts that we might have, saying we ought to do this, or we're obliged to do that, or in every place, in any circumstance, it would be wrong of me to do this, and so on. And I think the recognition of an ideal moral order is part of the recognition of contingency, of the idea that God exists. It implies the existence of a real foundation of God. Now, you might think that's pretty weak. You might not really see the point. So let's do a test. How about that? Is there anyone in the world right now, maybe let's just say America, anywhere in the world, maybe Mar-a-Lago, but anywhere in the world, is there anyone anywhere in the world that you think that they are doing things that you think they should stop doing, no matter what they personally believe about the correctness of their behaviour? We call things just and unjust. Perhaps the suffering of countless innocents we feel is unjust, but buried within that is the appeal to a greater ideal of actual justice, of timeless and pure justice, if you like. Or it's an appeal to your own private fantasies and fancies. And so the argument against God folds in on itself, because it depended not on saying that the world was really unjust, but not simply things didn't happen just to please your own standard. And if so, we find, I think, atheism for us turns out to be a bit too simple. So our conclusion is we see an understanding of good and evil built on a framework supplied to us from an outside source, i.e. in this case God. We see this argument as rational and reasonable. The argument provides inductive support for the existence and the belief in God, and is one of several phenomena that seems more probable in a theistic universe than a godless one. I'll hand over to John. Question? Oh, sorry, yes, thirdly, finally our question therefore becomes, with that conclusion in mind, where have good and evil come from, and how can we be so sure?
Okay, thank you, Josh. Good evening, everyone. So our second and third arguments I'm going to try and present to you now. Our second argument, which Mike has briefly covered, is the argument from physics, an argument for cosmological fine-tuning, as it's often known. So firstly, we're going to illustrate the evidence. Physicists have observed, particularly over the last 100 years or so, that there are laws of nature, like gravity, there are physical constants, like the cosmological constant, and there are the initial conditions of the universe that are indisputably fine-tuned for a life-permitting universe. And physicists describe this in various ways to illustrate the unlikeliness of this. So Paul Davies, an agnostic theoretical physicist, describes it as a cosmic jackpot, if you've read his book. Freeman Dyson describes it as the fact that the universe seems to know that we were coming before it happened. And I'm sure some of you heard of Fred Hoyle, who is the astronomer royal, and he described it as, it looks as if a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, chemistry and biology. Let me give you one example of this fine-tuning, just to illustrate the point. One is gravity. And the point of the fine-tuning argument is how narrow the band of possibilities are. So Paul Davies again explains that if the strength of gravity was changed by 1 part in 10 to the 40, which is basically absolutely nothing, then a star the size of the sun simply would not exist. It could not exist. And therefore neither would any form of life. It rests, as he puts it, on a knife edge. And yet, in itself, that seems extremely unlikely. It's very improbable. But you might say there might just be one fluke. That might be just a fluke, as Mike's argued. Yet the point of the fine-tuning argument is not just one of these things that are fine-tuning. It's a whole series of things that are often interlinked and interwebbed. So that's the point of the fine-tuning argument. It's extremely improbable on one count, but when they're all twinned together, it looks like something really weird has happened. And one of the options is chance, as Mike's presented. So my conclusion from that evidence, and indeed the conclusion of some atheists who've turned into theists, is that in such a highly improbable universe, that actually God is a reasonable explanation as to why this is the case. And please note, I'm not arguing for God of the gaps here, that God is just filling some gap in our scientific knowledge, because science knows what these constants are. It's about which explanation is the most plausible. So rather than you believing it from me, I'm going to give you the example of a guy called Anthony Flew, who is probably one of the most famous atheists of the last 100 years or so. He changed his mind. And even if he considered the fact that there could be more than one universe, the multiverse as it's sometimes known, he says, multiverse or not, we still have to come to terms with the origins of the laws of nature. And the only viable explanation is the divine mind. Now, interestingly, he wasn't a Christian. He was what you describe it ultimately as a deist. He just believed that there was a mind out there that caused that. Now, obviously I believe that's a Christian God, but I don't think this argument gets you there. It simply suggests that there was a divine mind that would control these forces. And his suggestion is that a divine mind is the best explanation. And so to me, it's a pretty simple argument. When you look out at the universe and came into existence with the Big Bang, where space and time came into existence, you need something outside of space and outside of time to cause that into being. So that's part one. On top of that, there's this question of why there is something rather than nothing. And when you look at this something, and it's extremely fine-tuned for a life to be permitted, it seems to me that that's an entirely reasonable thing to think that a God who's eternal and immaterial could be the most plausible explanation of fine-tuning. So our question is, what is a more plausible explanation than a God for the fine-tuning of the universe? So, that's our second argument. The third is this time we're moving away from morality and ethics, we're moving away from science and physics, we're now thinking about the topic of history and philosophy, and what with it being Easter, and we've all eaten a lot of Easter eggs, I thought we'd look at the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus being raised from the dead. And I think the distinction with this argument is that this argument is exclusively for the Christian God. The first two arguments could in theory apply to many of the gods that Mike has mentioned. So firstly, the evidence. Well, history, as some of you probably know better than I do, is the weighing and synthesising of historical sources. But rather than go into, I don't know, the example of Josephus or Pliny or whatever, what I wanted to do is to focus on an explanation of the data set rather than the data set itself, although obviously there's very good evidence there. So what I'm going to do is to illustrate what pretty much overwhelmingly scholars and historians would accept as historical datum, facts that they would accept. And these historians are from all stripes. It's not just wonky Christians like me, it's atheist agnostic scholars as well. And the reason I've chosen this sort of minimal facts approach is because the strength of the evidence is so persuasive that everyone, whatever their background and bias, will accept it as a fact. And there's four of them I just want to reference, and I'll call it the historical bedrock, if you will. I'd like you to think about what best explains this bedrock. So number one, Jesus of Nazareth, who lived in the early part of the 1st century, died by crucifixion at the hand of the Romans and was an itinerant preacher and claimed to be a miracle worker. That's fact one. Fact two, Jesus appeared in some sense to his followers who began to preach that he'd been raised from the dead from Jerusalem, the place where he died, where in theory their claims could immediately have been falsified. Fact three, Saul of Tarsus, later known as Paul, the earliest Christian, changed his mind as a result of this appearance of Jesus, and along with other followers who also claimed an appearance, were willing to go to their deaths stating that Jesus had risen from the dead. And fourthly, and this is a bit of a different fact, lots of societal changes happened after Jesus' resurrection was said to happen, which were extremely unlikely. For example, the fact that the Jews, who'd been worshipping on a Sabbath, a Saturday, for thousands of years, suddenly start worshipping on a Sunday, and the reason, because they claim that Jesus had risen from the dead. And there's lots of other societal changes as well that are a bit unique in that. So with that historical bedrock, which as I say is not my view, that's the view of the consensus of the scholarly sort of convention, what's our conclusion from the evidence? Well, my suggestion would be, when you look at all of the various theories for that, and given the background data of a God who potentially was a designer, who may at some point have revealed himself to the Jewish people potentially, and that this Jesus character, who claims to be a miracle worker, in and around that religious sort of context, the idea of the resurrection of Jesus being the most plausible explanation, I think, is not completely unreasonable. And actually, to add to that, I think the other explanations fail to have explanatory power. So our last question of those three is, what's your explanation, what's Mike's explanation of that historical bedrock? Good evening. What's your explanation of those facts as historians know it, which, as I say, is accepted by the overwhelming scholarly consensus? So we've got 2 minutes left of our 15 minutes, and I wanted to just briefly sum up what we've come to. So tonight, Josh and I have tried to present three of a whole series of arguments for God. I think there are many more. And for each one, what we've tried to do is, very briefly, given the time constraint, and I'm sure Mike knows this feeling well, we've tried to illustrate some testable evidence that you can go away and validate. And then to us, we've explained what our conclusion is from that data. And by nature, I'm a second guesser, I'm a doubter, and I've had significant doubts about my faith, and I've tried to weigh the information as best I can. And I'm sure you'll tell me where I'm wrong. But we conclude with those three questions for Mike, and then our final closing summary. So firstly, the questions for us is, where have this concept of good and evil come from? Why has it convinced people like C.S. Lewis and Francis Collins, the head of the genome in the US, that seems to be good evidence for a God? Secondly, what's the cause of both the universe coming into existence out of space-time and this cause of fine-tuning? Is it simply a fluke? And thirdly, what is your explanation of the historical bedrock accepted by the overwhelming scholarly consensus around Jesus' death and resurrection? And so in sum, we propose that A, the existence of good and evil, B, the nature of our finely tuned universe, and C, the historical evidence surrounding Jesus' death and the birth of early Christianity, are best explained by the existence of the Christian God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John and Josh, and thank you very much to everyone for staying on their allotted times. So now it's up to Mike. He's got a 5-minute period to reply to the arguments that the guys put across.
In response to John and Josh, where does good and evil come from, if not from God? Good and evil comes from our concept of to help people to live in harmony is good, to harm people, to kill people is bad. To kill, possibly some people kill for pleasure, that's pure evil, some people kill for gain. We are mammals, and if you look at the entire mammalian kingdom, the idea is to kill for benefit, without a doubt. You can watch any natural history program. There is very little in way of community help between species. That is our natural instinct. We've been able to realise that killing for benefit, and let's be fair, we did do that even after we got into societies. We were still killing for benefit. That's how our feudal system came about. We've surpassed that, and we have decided that good is to help each other and evil is to harm for benefit, for personal gain. That does not come from religious scriptures. Religious scriptures come from the time when we were still killing for benefit, without a doubt. Our religious period in our world, the medieval world, was probably one of the most brutal periods we've ever lived through, and that is supposedly where religious morality has come from. And I would also say that where does good and evil come from, and the religious people understand the difference between good and evil, is why does this God not inform everybody of his concept of good and evil, rather than just, as I said before, specially selected chosen few? It'd be an easy thing to do to say to all of us, hey guys, you've got it all wrong. This is what I want. I'm asking all of you, I'm telling all of you. It doesn't seem to happen. What caused the universe to happen in such a precise manner if it wasn't caused by a sentient being outside of our physical reality? Well, William Lane Craig covers this quite a lot, and he actually says that it's metaphysical, so we shouldn't try to understand it too much because it's actually unknowable for us. It's outside of our realm of knowing. But my question to William Lane Craig would be, and to Josh and John here, in that case then, how come religion seems to know all about it if it is unknowable and metaphysical? And on the third point, Jesus, John put forward some ideas and led them with the word fact. It is a fact. There is not one single contemporary corroborative piece of writing or evidence for the existence of a person called Jesus of Nazareth who stood in front of Pontius Pilate circa 30 Common Era. Now, let's consider the difference between a myth and a story, or a biography, or a religion. I can turn around and say that Herodotus wrote the Greek theogony that explains the existence of Zeus, who was the son of Kronos. And this is called a myth, a Greek myth. It wasn't always called a myth. When the Greeks ruled the world, it was called a religion, and Kronos existed, and so did Zeus. In the Egyptian world we had Osiris, and we call that Egyptian myth. It wasn't always called a myth. In the Egyptian world Osiris existed. We can talk about the Cilician Pilots and Mithra, and we can talk about a person called Yahweh, or a god called Yahweh. This is Israelite myth. Jesus, at the moment he's a religion. He's not going to stay a religion much longer. In the future he will also be demoted to the realm of myth, just like all the previous religions throughout history. So 10 minutes?
No.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be 5.
Five. Oh right, did I go too far?
No, you've had 5 minutes.
I've had 5 minutes, so I need to hand over to John and Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so I'll take just about a minute. First on the morality, a couple of points there. God, if he exists, we believe, I suppose to address one of Mike's points, is I assume allowed to explain his morality to us in any which way he chooses. I wouldn't say that this really impacts our question of whether or not a God exists or not. It may be obfuscated or misty to us, but I still don't think that addresses the question as such. One of the tenets we put out is that if an atheistic understanding of the universe is to be accepted, that moral accountability for one's actions doesn't seem to be quite there in as full force as it would be in a God-driven world, if you like. If there were objective moral values, if there were duties under naturalism, if we were obligated to do this, if we were obligated to do that, where do we see the relevance of living a life or following a moral accountability in that sort of sense? If life ends at the grave, to quote Dostoevsky, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. Whether you are Stalin or you are a saint, it all comes out the same in the end. We could appeal to a variety of other sources that do indicate to us that the moral landscape in which we live, certainly here in the West, is highly influenced in our legal system, in the ways we interact, by the idea that a God exists. And to quote a slightly strange source that you perhaps might not expect for us, but if we appeal to Nietzsche's understanding of where our morality comes from, he sees it as distinctly coming from a Christian background, which he rails against. He, a moral nihilist, wanted to do away with the whole thing, but there was still an understanding and an acceptance that the idea of a God was where our morality, our oughts, our desires and things like that come into play regarding.
Okay, I've got a few quick points on cosmological fine-tuning, God and human psyche, and Jesus, so I'll be quick. First point about cosmological fine-tuning. Let's be absolutely clear on the argument. The purpose of the argument is not to say that humans are the only purpose of the universe. It's to say that it is extremely improbable that there would be a life-permitting universe. So there does need to be an important distinction made there. And I think the point we've got here is you've got two options. I think Mike's right. Chance is one. And it is the biggest, most fluky chance in a million years. People use the analogy, if you're in the middle of a firing squad, everyone else was shot and there's loads of people firing at you and you missed. It could be a fluke. But you'd be improbed to think, whoa, that was a bit weird, I need to try and think why. I would suggest God is a very reasonable hypothesis there. You've got God or chance. They both seem sort of relatively equal there. My proposal would be God. On cryptic messaging, one reason maybe God hasn't chosen to reveal himself with absolute clarity is that could be called coercion, and love and coercion generally don't go very well together as a rule. God in human psyche. Key point on this, I think interesting proposals from Mike, but my suggestion would be that actually the explanation of why religion exists doesn't really deal with the evidence for or against a God, and so the God hypothesis is not nullified by explaining where a belief in God may have come from, although historically I think it's quite interesting. I think the God hypothesis stands or falls on the evidence. But a couple of quick points. Religion, Mike suggested, came about because it's imposed by dictators. Christianity, the birth of Christianity was where people decided to believe something that would come at huge personal cost to themselves. There was no compelling force against them, for them. There was no military advantage, and yet Christianity grew. So that would need to be thought about. So key point for me on the God in human psyche. Undoubtedly there is nonsense in religion. Undoubtedly the Catholics have done some nuts things with indulgences. That doesn't necessarily nullify the God hypothesis. Last point, Mike on Jesus is quite wildly outside the scholarly consensus, and this is important. To quote Van Voorst, the theory of Jesus' non-existence is now effectively dead as a scholarly question. So to me, I think we still need to explain those facts, and I don't think there's a naturalistic explanation as to why that's the case.
Thank you very much. Do you have all to go over to questions now?
Yes, yeah, sorry.
Yep, no problem, please do. Right, we'll take a short break then, and then we'll do questions. Yep.